It's easy to send. I am now recording. So welcome everyone. Welcome to 2021. It's fantastic to see you all. It's going to be quite fun, and we're going to have it's just great to be able to connect together, and we're going to have some time of worship. But I'm going to start by reading a prayer that was sent from the EA, and it's quite a nice prayer. So I'm going to read this, then pray, then we're going to have a bit of worship. I'm Mutus, going to share, and a bit of the worship today is two songs which will be from different periods of 2020. One will be when we did worship in little boxes, and one will be worship in the back garden. So both will be there, but will allow us to be able to worship out. And then I've got something to share to sort of lift our heads with excitement about the year ahead. So let's read this. Lord Jesus, we join with the angels, shepherds, and wise men, coming to you with our praise and adoration. Hope has come, and he has a name. Many of us have come to you this year, not with gifts of gold and myrrh, but carrying anxiety, loneliness, and sorrow. Yet we come to the one who's drawn near to us, understands us, and leads us into places of hope and trust. Hope has a name. Lord, meet with us in our worship. Light up the moments of darkness. Speak in the times of stillness. Touch us again with your transforming love. Hope has a name. In Jesus' name, amen. So I'm going to mute you all now, and then going to share. And I wanted to start with the song, It Is Well With My Soul. I don't know if any of you watched Ryan's thing he had shared on Facebook, but a little documentary, but it was brilliant on the story of this song, and it's well worth a watch. But I just felt actually it's a good place to start this year. It is well with my soul. So I'm going to share the screen, I'm going to share sound so that I can be muted and sing my heart out. And here we go. So where am I? I can mute.
Like a river, attendeth my way. When sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast told me to say, is well, it is well with my soul. sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. Lord, haste the day when my faith shall be sight. The clouds be rolled back as a scroll. The trumpets resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul.
Father, I just pray that this year, Lord, as we come into this new year, I pray, God, that it will be well with our soul. Lord, I pray, Father, even today as we just meet together, Lord, it will just do us good. It will just bring us right into your presence and that sense of lifting our heads into all that you've got for us. Lord, please. Well, I want us now to sing actually one of my favourite songs, and it is written by our very own John Ryan, and but it is a song that I absolutely love. So here we go. I'm going to do the remember, sharing sound, fantastic. Onto the iPad, and here we go.
Once we were captives, now we are free. We were the broken, now we are redeemed. We were the fallen, but now we can soar. Whether you have weakness, Mary is strong. Where there are battles, he's already won. No longer sleeping, but now we can dream. We are the living hope, and I hope that will not fade. We are the living stones, chosen people for your praise. We are the living God, for Jesus is alive. Ruling and reigning and seated on high by the Father's side. Jesus is alive. Whoa, whoa. Jesus is alive. Whoa, whoa. Jesus is alive. Once needing mercy, now we have grace. Where we are sinners, now we are saints. We were in darkness, but now we are light. Where we were orphans, now daughters and sons. Where we were homeless, your kingdom now comes. Where there is sadness, it will come to an end. We have a living hope, and a hope that will not fade. We are the living stones, the chosen people for your praise. We have a living God, for Jesus is alive. Ruling and reigning and seated on high by the Father's side. For Jesus is alive. Whoa, whoa. Jesus is alive. Whoa, whoa. Jesus is alive. The living word made living flesh, the perfect Savior unto death, where death was put to death to bring you life. Life that rose up from the grave and broke the chains, unlocked the gates from all to enter in, for it is done. The living word made living flesh, the perfect Savior unto death, where death was put to death to bring new life. A life that rose up from the grave and broke the chains, unlocked the gates for all to enter in, for it is done. We have a living hope, and a hope that will not fade. We are the living stones, the chosen people for your praise. We have a living God, for Jesus is alive. Ruling and reigning and seated on high by the Father's side. For Jesus is alive. Whoa, whoa. Jesus is alive. Whoa, whoa. Jesus is alive.
Oh, you can't beat a song that's got a whoa in it.
Oh, whoa, whoa, Ethan.
Whoa, I love that. Right, I'm going to share now. So, oh, my wife's moving across.
Do you want to look at me while this is
Yeah,
going
you
on?
don't want to look at. Right, I could look at you.
You could look at me. I could look
Anyway.
at I could stand over them poor faces.
As we come into this new year, I woke up on New Year's Day with an image in my mind. And it's from the film The Hobbit. I'm going to actually highlight myself. Let me just do this so that, oh, I'll do it here. Here we go. So that, oh, here we are. Look at that. Now that's for the recording is good. So I woke up, and in the film The Hobbit, or in the story The Hobbit, depending on where you kind of look at it, the story actually, they could have done it in one film. Anyway, it's kind of actually the moment where there's a moment where the dwarfs on their adventure and the Hobbit go into these woods. And as they go into these woods, the woods are so dark and thick, and they start following this path. And there's a moment where they lose the path. They can't find it, and it's dark. And in fact, it's so dark they can hardly breathe. The air isn't getting into it. And they're in this forest, and they've lost their way. And it just really hit me of, we've kind of gone through 2020 and people have had this big thing, the end of 2020, 2021's going to come. And we kind of broke into 2021 and actually everything's identical. Nothing has changed. COVID hasn't disappeared. And though the vaccine is coming, we're still a long way behind all of us getting the vaccine. We're kind of in this strange, it's exactly the same as 2020. And so it felt like those dwarfs in this forest where they're kind of gone through and they're just lost. They're kind of, well, what do we do? Suddenly we come into 2021 and we're still on Zoom. We met once, we had a meeting. And actually, by the grace of God, there was someone did test positive from that, but it was a bit later down the week, so you didn't all need to go into quarantine. So it was kind of like, hey, it's vulnerable. And actually, it just hits you that here we are back on Zoom and you think, oh. And there's a moment where Bilbo, in this forest where everyone is losing hope, suddenly starts climbing a tree. And he climbs up and climbs up and climbs up and climbs up. And then he comes through the top of the forest And as he breaks through, the butterflies emerge and the sun shines on his face and he looks out and he can see where they're going. And I just felt today, I wanted to do something which is almost like to lift our heads today at the start of the year. And I'm going to spend 2 weeks on this, but I want us to lift our heads and look at something that is totally spectacular. And actually something that would lift us, like coming through the forest, lifting our eyes and seeing where we're going, seeing what it's all about. See, the extraordinary thing is, as we come into 2021, the vision of us as a church is the same vision that every single church that has ever existed has ever had. There's no new vision. We might have new things we're going for, but the ultimate vision is exactly, there's Evan in the background, exactly the same vision that all of us have ever had. The 120 in the upper room were given the same vision that you and me have. And this was it. Go and make disciples, baptize them, teach them all I've commanded, because I will return. The whole vision of the bride of Christ, the church, has always been this. We're heading towards a wedding. We're heading towards a wedding. Every church, that 120, that was their vision statement. When you go to Antioch, what was their vision? To build a church so that Christ will return. When you go to Ephesus, what's their vision? To build a church so that Christ will return. When you go right around the world, if you go to New York, any church in New York, the vision is to build a church so that Christ will return. If you go to anywhere in Cardiff, the vision of every church, build a church so that Christ will return. You come to Rydvelin, the vision is this. Build a church so that Christ will return. And so today I want to lift our heads and look in the book of Revelation and see an image of a wedding that actually I want to excite you is we can be sure is going to take place because it's already started. And actually it started before time and will end time when it actually happens. So just to excite you and look at some of the imagery. But when we look at the book of Revelation, we see this is John recalling a vision that he's had. And when you start looking at what he's seen, he hasn't got the language to explain it. He's struggling. How do I explain what I've seen that is beyond anything I've ever seen on earth? How do I communicate this? And so the language he uses almost goes back to like the Old Testament prophets, the same way they tried to portray it. It's interesting when he writes the book of Revelation, it's very similar to other styles of writing of the day. It's a style of writing. And what often happens in the West is we look at the book of Revelation and we kind of disappear in it. It kind of sucks us in and we're starting to say, oh, is this the European community? Is this the Antichrist? Oh, and we kind of get lost in all of this and lose the very thing that it's for. I remember going to Bulgaria many years ago with my dad, and they were sitting with some church leaders who had really gone through persecution. They'd suffered, spent time in prison. And all of them said this. It was the book of Revelation that kept them going. In other words, it was the hope that they saw in the book of Revelation gave them hope to live right now. And I kind of feel with us, what we're living through at the moment with COVID, with all the pain and the heartache and just the isolation, the sort of what we're having to go through, actually, now's the time to look at Revelation. It brings hope. And so if you turn to Revelation 19, I just want to read verses 7 and 9. And it's just, I love these verses. Let us rejoice and exult and give him glory. For the marriage of the Lamb has come, and its bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen and bright pure. For the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. So John sees this amazing marriage taking place. He sees that there is a marriage that's going to happen. And I kind of want to talk, or I'm going to give my title for these two talks this week and next week, the title Grace and Responsibility, which I know sounds like a sort of a Jane Austen book, but it's kind of like actually, it feels like grace and responsibility, that what we receive is all of grace, but we also have a responsibility to build the church. The Bible often talks about God's relationship with his people as the bridegroom and the bride. In the Old Testament, it looks at Israel as an unfaithful bride. And then when we come into the New Testament, we see in Ephesians 5, verse 24, that Christ is seen as the bridegroom and the church is seen as the bride. And we see here in verse 7, the marriage of the Lamb. Revelation 21, verse 2 says, New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven, for God has made ready as a bride. And so we see this incredible prophetic language right through Scripture of a wedding that is taking place. So we, as people here in Hope Community Church, Rydvelin, Hope Church, Rydvelin, threw in the community again. Well done, I remembered who we are. We are preparing for a wedding. It's funny, in 2020, obviously, I remember this time last year, we were looking at possible wedding venues for Jess and Ethan. Little did we know that that was totally irrelevant. But actually, you know, we kind of were looking and thinking, oh, this one. And we found one for, oh, this is great. Heather, I remember walking around the barn saying, it's a bit small for the numbers you're expecting. And it would have been perfect, actually, for the 30 that we had in the end, but we weren't allowed to have one in Wales, so it ended up in England and was found a few days before. But anyway, you prepare. But actually, when you look at a Hebrew wedding, the imagery of the Hebrew wedding gives us such hope for today. We look back at what Jesus was referring to in the New Testament, a traditional Hebrew wedding. It is full of some amazing imagery. The first part of a Hebrew wedding is this: the father of the bridegroom chooses the bride. The father of the bridegroom chooses who's going to marry the son. Now, the interesting thing is, the son also has a say in it. It's not like this is who you're marrying. The son can say, I would like this woman to be my bride. So you see Abraham looking for Isaac. They send out for Rachel, and it was Rachel, yeah, got it right. You send out for Rachel, and they go. And then the interesting thing is this: when they find Rachel, they say, would you like to marry? So it's interesting, it's not just you are going to, the bride is asked, we would like you to marry, and she says yes. And so what we see in a Hebrew wedding is it starts with a father saying, I would like this person to marry my son. Now, if you think about that for you and me, suddenly the start of this wedding that we're going to be talking about today starts before the foundation of the world was created. Because before the foundation of the world was created, you were chosen by God. You were known by God. And we see elsewhere, it says Jesus asks the Father for you and me. So we have been chosen by the Father for the Son. The Son has asked for you. And so actually, if you look at a Hebrew wedding, right back, it starts before time even began. You were chosen. And so when we look at where we're going, our assurance that that's going to happen is this: it's already, the process has started, and you were chosen as part of it. And then what happens? So once that moment, the father of the bridegroom has chosen the bride, and the bride has been asked, and the bride has said yes. Do you know what happens? There is a ceremonial washing. There is immersion in water. The bridegroom washes and is baptized, and then the bride is baptized. Doesn't have to be in the same location, could be in two different locations, but they're symbolizing a covenant that this is going to take place. And it's also a sign of purity and washing yourselves clean, which when you then think of that as an image, what happens when Jesus started his ministry on earth? What was happening? He went to see John the Baptist by the River Jordan, and what happens? He was immersed in water. The bride has been chosen by the Father for the bridegroom. Then the bridegroom is washed. And what happens to each of us when we respond to Jesus? What happens? We are washed. We're baptized. And so you see this incredible imagery that is there in the Hebrew wedding preparation is so obvious for us as we come in. The next phase is a deal has been dealt, that the price of the bride has been set. And so what then happens, there is a major moment, which is like the wedding ceremony, but it's kind of, it's funny, we would probably see it as the engagement, but actually it was legally, it was wedding, it was a marriage, which is the time of mutual commitment, which was seen as the shadukin. And this would happen, and what they would do is they would put up the huppah, the sort of the sort of all the poles with the cloth over it, and they'd make like a sort of, what would we call it? We'd call it a pagoda. But they make the pagoda, which symbolizes a new household being born. And then what would happen is the bride and the bridegroom would meet in the pagoda, in the, I call it the huppah, and in the huppah. And at that point, the payment would be made. The payment would be made and the legal documents would be signed. They are getting married. They are actually, by the eyes of the world at that point, they are seen as a married couple. Though they're not yet living together and they're not having sexual relationship together, but they are making a commitment. And then a sign of this covenant is they take a glass of wine and they both drink the wine, symbolizing this is what is going to happen. It is a legal moment where they do a declaration, this is what's going to happen. And so again, you kind of look at the imagery of this. And the imagery is so powerful that actually at this point in the huppah, the payment is made. And we know for us, for this wedding to take place, the payment was the son. The payment was actually the bridegroom himself. And so when we look at the Lord's Supper, when we look at that Last Supper in the upper room, what you see is there, the bridegroom saying, I'm about to pay the price. And here is the covenant that the price is going to be paid. Here's the covenant that it's going to be good. Here's the covenant you can join me in knowing the wedding is going to take place. It is sealed. It is done. And then, of course, for us, Jesus dies and resurrected. And what's the last things he then says? Because what happens in the huppah at the end of this ceremony is the bridegroom looks at the bride and says, I now go. I now leave you. I'm going back to my father's house to prepare a room for you. And then at some point during that year, the bridegroom will come to the bride. And there'll be a sound of the shofar, and there'll be great jubilation. The bride is then taken back into the huppah. They then do a last blessing, and then they're taken to the bridegroom's father's house, to the room that's been prepared. And then the marriage is over, and they have a big feast and lots of days of celebration. That's a typical traditional Hebrew wedding. When you then think of that, this was the imagery that was in the minds of the writers, is full of so much incredible things. Like, for instance, the huppah, the first time they'd done the huppah, when you think of Mary and Joseph, they would have done that bit. That bit was what we would see as an engagement, but it's much more legal than that. In the eyes of the Hebrew world, they are married, and the only way out of that is a divorce, a religious divorce. So actually, after that is when Mary fell pregnant. They had made the deal, the payment would have been made, they would have had the bathing, they would have been in the huppah, they would have done the vows, they would have done the payment, they would have drunk the wine, and then Joseph would have gone to prepare the room for the last bit to take place, and Mary fell pregnant. Suddenly that's what they went through. It makes it feel cool. Actually, that's quite an image. But actually, for us, what an amazing image. We can know the next bit is going to take place. Why? Because we were chosen by the father of the bridegroom. Secondly, we were baptized. He's been baptized, we've been baptized. The payment has been made. We've drunk of the wine. The covenant is there. And then Jesus leaves the 120 and says, I now go back to make a room ready for you. We can know the next bit of the wedding's taking place. We can know Jesus is returning because it's already in process. There's no stopping that which has begun before time began. It's going to happen. It is full of the most incredible and wonderful image. And then we have this amazing picture. The bride has made herself ready. And next week, I want to take a bit more time on this, but actually that's our calling. Our calling is to make ourselves ready, knowing that the bridegroom is returning. Our calling is to prepare the church here in Rhydfelyn and right through the valleys of Wales and right through the nation of Wales, to see, maybe to start dreaming about seeing churches planted about, taking on the sports bar so that it become a resource that can serve this community and serve communities all around. Why? Because we want to prepare ourselves for Jesus to return. We want to be a bride ready, prepared, ready for that return. And what I then, just to end with this, I love this, is when you then think of what's the bride doing? Well, the bride has to be ready because they know at some point the bridegroom's coming, at some point during the year, but they don't know when. So they've got to prepare. They've got to have the lamps ready full of oil. They've got to be on alert. And I kind of feel right now, as we're walking through COVID and walking through the season, we've got to say, hey, we've got to keep making ourselves ready. Let's lift our eyes up above the trees and see, look, we were chosen before the foundation of the world. He's come, he's been baptized, the payment's been made. Suddenly we've drunk of the wine. Suddenly we can know for a fact he's coming back. The last bit of the wedding's going to take place. We know that because of all that's happened. But on top of that, we've got to make ourselves ready because actually, bizarrely, we can somehow speed up the process. If we do all that God's called us to do, we can actually impact. We know the church isn't yet fully ready. We know there's still people to be saved. We know there's still people to be added. And some of you will have heard me say this, but I always think I have a very simple theology really on the return of Jesus. And it is slightly based on my wedding. And when I looked at Liz, when she was coming down the aisle, I didn't look at her and think, poor thing, someone had to marry her. I looked at her and said, get down this aisle quickly because this relationship needs to go further. I'm in love with you. I want this relationship to go further. And I get this picture of Jesus looking down from heaven at us, at the church, at his bride being prepared. And there'll be a moment where he'll turn to his Father and say, God, listen to that singing. Listen to that worship. Listen to that evangelism. Listen to that sacrifice. Look at that faith. Whoa, I can't stay away any longer. It's time for the wedding to be completed. And so our hope as a church, and the hope that we bring for everyone here, is a wedding is going to take place. And this has already started. So much of the wedding has already taken place. It's just the final bit. The final bit. And so often we have our Western mindset, which is it's just the day. Actually, in Hebrew thought, is all those processes all have equal value. None can come before the other. It's already happening. We're on high alert. At any time, he could come. And next week, I want to look at a bit more of this thing of our responsibility. How do we make ourselves ready? What is it we're going for? Based on the grace of God. But that excitement, it's there before us. And so I'm going to end by sharing, if I find it now, the little bit of The Hobbit. And just the moment where he breaks through. And so here we go.
I can see a lake and a river and the lonely mountain. We're almost there. Can you hear me?
And so today, let's break through the forest. Let's look and see what God has got for each of us. And with that, I'm going to take us into breakout rooms. And I'd just like to have a moment where we can just pray for one another, really, about our hopes for 2021, and just to have some chance just to pray and encourage one another. And so I'm going to probably pause the recording at this moment in time. And actually, I'll probably stop it at this point. So for those who are watching online, it's been a blessing having you with us. Just take some time and pray for yourself for the things that God's got for you in the coming days. And we're going to breakout room soon. Goodbye. Right, that's